I'm working on my Mazda. This is a 2002 MX-5 SP, so it's a pretty rare and unusual car. It's one of 100 factory turbo cars, or technically converted turbo cars for the Australian market. What sort of sets this apart from some of the other kits that were made and released through dealerships like the BBR cars over in the UK is that nothing about this setup is done to highlight the aftermarket partner. When this car was built, Mazda wanted it to look and feel exactly like a factory car, just with the turbo. And the reason for that is that if this car wasn't successful in the Australian market, you wouldn't have gotten the Mazda speed. This was a market test to see if there was enough overlap between people who wanted to get turbo kits for an MX-5 and people who wanted to get a turbo MX-5 from Mazda. I know that sounds probably a bit silly, but back in the day, that's what Mazda was looking for, and Australia had a good motorsports scene, and they decided to build this. It was successful, and now the world has the Mazda speed. So the way that this car came about means it's a little bit unusual in some ways, and hopefully I'll be able to point some of that out to you as I pull it apart. But there's no instruction manual for this. There's no guides on how to get the turbo out on this car, so we're going to go on a wild journey of discovery together, and I'll point out some of the things that I know about this car along the way. Starting at the beginning, we've got the very prominent carbon Kevlar airbox. Every time I open this, people ask me if this came with the car, and yes it did. They made these specifically for the SPs, and as you can see very prominently, it has a Mazda logo embossed on the top. They weren't perfect. These latches had a tendency to break, and they also have a tendency to come undone, which is why I've got this little bit of rope around the base holding all the latches down. So the goal at the moment is to get the turbo out. There's a couple of leaks around some gaskets, so time to replace them. Like a lot of turbo cars, you need to get rid of everything intake related to have a shot. So you can just make out inside the intake the number 46, and that is my car's build number. So every single one of these SPs, there was one carbon Kevlar airbox made, so they have a batch number, and that's unofficially how people number their cars. Even more difficult to see is the handwritten part number, and somewhere else on here is another number 46, so it's quite difficult to see through the clear coat. Not many people believe me, but these blue couplers are what the car originally came with. So all the SPs have these blue couplers on their intake system. It's a very cool, very well made intake. I've considered getting these copied, so for other people. I don't know, do you think I should? Let me know in the comments. Once you get to this part of the car, it becomes very clear very quickly how much effort Mazda was putting into keeping this all on brand. All of the castings, and keep in mind this was a very small production run, have the Mazda logo embossed, every single one of them, including the dump pipe when I get to that, and the manifold. So they wanted this to be a Mazda car through and through, and didn't want anything associated with the tuner. You can start seeing some of the many small changes that were made to get this car over the line. The location of the power steering fluid reservoir was moved so that they were able to get the airbox in that location. And if anyone is paying attention, you'll notice that there is no windscreen water bottle down at the hot end of the car. They moved that one down to the front of the car to get it away from the heat. I've never had the turbo out of the car before, but I have had this intake off, and nothing about it is easy. I could use a smaller spanner. As is common with a lot of turbo cars, you can't undo the nuts without lifting the piping at the same time. A common trick people do with these is that they change the point for the boost reference to the cold side of the intercooler to just get a little bit more boost. I've run my car like that before, and it does give a reasonable power boost, but for the time being, I'm happy running it stock. If I can get the hose off. So with that intake system out of the way, you can start to see why I wanted to get this out. The turbo itself, these bolts are quite inaccessible and it's blowing exhaust around here, so I have to get the turbo off to get to the two on this side. I have tried and it's just not really feasible. There is a bit of surface rust and a little bit of surface corrosion on everything. I've actually gone and detailed everything in the engine bay except this turbo setup, so this is going to go off and get ceramic coated. So the motivation here is really just to clean it up a little bit, and a little bit unnecessary, but hey, that's me. So this is as far as I've ever gotten before, and the reason I haven't gone further is because I know I need to get under the car to pull part of it off, and until I had a hoist I knew it was going to be a multi-day ordeal. As it is, this is definitely going to take a little bit of effort to figure out what's going on. I've got 4 lines between the oil and water supply and returns, so I have to figure out where everything is and figure out how to undo it. Alright, looks like I've got to start underneath the car, try and get to the exhaust and dump pipe. And I think once they're out of the way, I'll be able to reach all the water and oil lines from behind. I guess we'll find out. Time to get it in the air. So this right here is why I've never bothered attempting this job before. You can see there's quite a lot going on in there and not a lot of space. There are in fact 2 O2 sensors. This is the wideband O2 sensor for the upcoming Haltech. There we go, that's the wideband loose. And up the top there is the factory O2 sensor. Just behind that is one of the bolts I need to remove in order to get that pipe out. So I have to remove both the O2 sensors first before I can go anywhere. I'm actually a little bit concerned about getting this out. It's a relatively small community with these cars, and that O2 sensor has a terrible reputation, which I have no doubt is well earned. I'm going to try and get it out. Hopefully it doesn't take me an hour. I'm already out of ideas. Let me know how you'd get this one out in the comments while I bluster about for a while.
A few moments later.
After a bit of screwing around, I've decided to leave the O2 sensor on there and try and remove the exhaust pipe with it. I've got plenty of length and uni joints, and hopefully I can make this work. Well, that O2 sensor is disconnected from above now, so let's see if I can pull it down. There we go! Success. I'm not a mechanic, so I have no idea what I'm doing, but a friend of mine is, and when I was telling him what the job was, he said that usually when you pull out a turbo, you leave all the lines attached and you take it off the block. I had no idea, and I'm glad he gave me that advice, because it actually turns out that it's a little bit easier than I thought to get to the lines. These are the water feed and return for the turbo. They join together into this little harnessy thing, and they run around to the front just here, and that's one of the water lines there, and the other one's just underneath it. A little bit awkward, but I'll be able to undo that easily enough and pull that back through. This oil line is nice and easy to get to at the back and on top of the turbo. I will probably undo this one from on top of the turbo because it's actually a little bit more accessible in the back of the block. And then the oil feed I will be removing off the turbo most likely, because it's actually easier to access than off the block as well, but it doesn't look too hard, so wish me luck. Hopefully this is a trick that will help someone stuck in a position like this in the future. I found that if you get several spanners, you can lever off hoses that are really stuck by slowly working in a bit of width and then getting the next spanner on and levering it off. Well, it looks like all the hoses are now undone, except for this one, which by the looks of it will be much easier to undo once I get the turbo free. So I'm going to get the turbo free. I have to use this cut down 14mm to get round all of the nuts. I've had to use it before to tighten things up in some of the more awkward spots, but time to give it a go.
You call me a flight risk, try to close my eyelids and let the sound of water fill me from the bottoms up with the sun down. Take a quick look around, I don't recognize your eyes, but I know this leaves me on a pedestal. Sex, drugs, rock and roll, I've been trying to climb my way to the top of your heartbeat slowly. Hardly even know me,
There's always one
but you hold
troublesome
me
one.
closer than a mother with a baby. So don't let go, don't let it show. We all know just how this goes. Don't let go,
There we go.
don't let it show.
At some point,
We all
there's the
know
perfect
just how
combination of
this
extensions.
goes. Don't let go, don't let it show. We all know just how this goes.
Might need a bit more torque for that one.
Don't let it show. We all know just how this goes. You call me a savage, try to close my eyelids and let the sound of water fill me from the bottoms up with the sun down. Take a quick look around, I don't recognize your eyes. Vibes fall fast, hit the ground, not a single sound. Linger on, but I'm on to another round. Thought you knew I'm on the move and nowhere to be found. Thought you knew I'm on the move and nowhere to be found. So don't let go, don't let it show. We all know just how this goes. Don't let go, don't let it show. We all know just how this goes. Don't let go, don't let it show. We all know just how this goes. Don't let go, don't let it show. We all know just how this goes.
I think that might have been enough. So I've set the camera up in a really difficult position that's actually in the way, just so I can show people how insane this last bolt is on the manifold and how slow it is to get undone. So I've got this cut spanner so I can get the loop over it, and then I have to back it out, squeeze it out of the gap, move it back in, over and over until it's loose enough to undo by hand and pull the manifold forward piece by piece. So a very arduous process. Don't know how they got this step approved, but it's pretty wild. After a bit of thinking and battling, decided to go for pulling the turbo out with the dump pipe attached, and then trying to finish off the manifold. There it is. Oh. Now pull off the last 2 bolts on the manifold. Done.
The following day.
Well, I'm now on to day 2. I pulled everything apart yesterday, but now I have to pack up, clean up, make sure that nothing goes missing.
Don't let it go, don't let it show. We all know just how this goes. Don't let it go, we all know just how this goes.
So now we're on to the reason I had to do this in the first place. So this is the old gasket. You can see the amount of exhaust blow by that was going through these gaskets because the studs were continually backing out is just absolutely crazy. So that's all just exhaust, all that's all soot. That's happened over time, so need to replace this gasket and need to replace the studs and the nuts. Having a look at our turbo assembly, we can again see why I needed to pull this apart. You can see all the exhaust that was blowing by. The mount for the turbo, you can see that one of the studs had actually broken, so it couldn't be tightened. It was allowing exhaust past the gasket, so it was blowing exhaust into the engine bay, which you can quite clearly see on the back of the turbine. You can see all the exhaust gases that were blowing by and making a mess of my turbo. The plan now is to separate the turbine housings and get them all ceramic coated, get some new studs, new gaskets, and then reassemble it all better than new.